Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Book Fest Fall of 2022. My name is Jennifer Ann Gordon, and I am thrilled to be here today with Bram Stoker nominated author Philip Fracassi. Philip, thank you so much for joining me here today in conversation.
Hey Jennifer, yeah, it's nice to see you again, and excited to be here at BookFest. Thank you.
Yes. So let's start with having you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive into your work, how it's created, why it's created.
Uh, about me, yeah. I've been a published writer just about 7 years now. I published my first book in 2015. Um, but I've been writing my whole life, obviously, and my background is I've also been a screenwriter. I've written a couple of screenplays. I used to write for Disney. I wrote a screenplay for Lifetime Television. I just am wrapping up a screenplay right now based on one of my own short stories called Death, My Old Friend, which is public knowledge, so it's no big deal to say that. And and I've been writing, I guess, professionally uh, since since 2015. As far as fiction is concerned, I've published a couple story collections. I published a few novellas. I published a limited edition novel called Boys in the Valley last October 2021, and I have some books coming up, including A Child Alone with Strangers and Gothic and Boys in the Valley, which is coming out in a worldwide trade edition. And yeah, I basically am a full-time writer guy at this point, and that's kind of what I do.
So, Philip, I knew you were a screenwriter. I am surprised. I didn't know that you wrote for Disney and a screenplay for Lifetime made I was just like, I didn't expect that from, dark fiction horror author Philip Fracassi. Now,
Yeah.
Lifetime has, I don't want to say a reputation, but it can be a guilty pleasure for some people. Now, was your screenplay one of those guilty pleasure Lifetime movies? Was it a
I don't
VC Andrews screenplay?
I don't think it was a guilty pleasure. It wasn't a rip from the headlines
uh,
movie. It was a horror mystery that I wrote called Girl Missing. And so it was kind of it wasn't their traditional kind of hallmarky. I don't want to say
yeah,
anything
like
negative, right?
something
But
is, yeah, it's not negative.
no, but
Yeah,
it wasn't
those
kind of
like,
what
there's
you think
something
about.
wrong with my daughter.
Right. It wasn't right. It wasn't right. It wasn't anything quite like that. So it was I think they did back when that movie came out in 2015. I think at that time they were doing more. They were doing kind of a lot of horror mystery stuff, and then I think they kind of shifted into kind of doing straight rip from the headline kind of stuff. Um, so this was just, I think, just before that,
Just before the
change.
entire world became obsessed with true crime and
Yeah,
inundating ourselves with things that
yeah.
are all too real all the time.
Yeah, and the Disney thing is, it's just something I kind of fell backwards into. I had an opportunity to write a couple children's movies for them, and so yeah, so I just it was work and it was fun. It was a lot of fun, and there is an element of irony that I actually do like writing stuff for kids.
Well, you have
I
a
wrote
children's book coming out
Yeah, I
as
have a
well.
children's book coming out called Boy with the Blue Rose Heart. And then I wrote like, I think I wrote like 7 Disney movies for like 5 and 6 year olds. So yeah, really, really kind of really different than the horror fiction that I write.
Yeah,
Um,
much different than the boys that are in Boys in the Valley, I would say.
yes, that
That's
is not an
not a
appropriate
kid's
book for,
book.
no, don't read that to your kids at night. No,
No, I had a hard time reading it at night, and I'm not a child.
right. Yeah, it's pretty
Intense.
savage. Yeah, it's pretty intense. Yeah.
I will say Boys in the Valley made me thankful that I didn't have children.
Yeah, between that one and A Child Alone with Strangers,
Yes.
yeah, I tend to write. I tend to, it's funny because Stephen King has a kind of he has a reputation for writing about kids a lot, and I've had to kind of physically force myself not to have
Yeah.
children necessarily in my books. And I think that, and I had a moment where I was like, why do I write about kids? Because someone had mentioned like all your books have like kids in them, and it's horrible. And
Yeah. And
I think
they're
what I
not
like, I think
happy books about children. It's like,
no, they're terrible. I
let's take
mean,
a child and put that
right.
child through the ringer.
Yeah, and you'll find a lot of books, right? A lot of books do that, and I think the reason is, at least for me, I can only speak for myself, but I think for me, what's interesting about it is that when you do something to an innocent, it really opens up this kind of like whole wealth of emotional response that a child has to something that is completely unknown than it would be, for like someone who's in like, a 40-year-old, seeing a ghost come out of a closet. It's not quite as interesting as an 8-year-old seeing a ghost come out of a closet,
Yeah.
right? It's like you want that like completely blank slate response. And I think that's one of the reasons, at least for me, I kind of enjoy using kids as my characters, is because I love that kind of totally innocent, blank slate emotional response to
I
what's
love
happening.
that.
And I think that's, but it is, you can overdo it. So you gotta kind of be careful.
And it's this is why I love horror so much, because I feel like horror, at its nature, it's very frightening. Um, and when it, like as you just said, if a child sees a ghost come out of the closet, it's a ghost. If a 40 something sees a ghost come out of the closet, first we start to think, am I having a nervous breakdown? Did I drink too much? Am I sleep
Right,
deprived? A
right.
child sees it and for a fact, well, it has to be a ghost.
Right, and it always bothers me. One thing, it's a pet peeve, I guess, is when you watch a horror movie or when you watch or read a horror book, and the kid says, "There's a monster in my room," and the parents are like, "Oh, you had a bad dream.
Yeah.
You're having nightmares. You're just a silly little boy or
Yeah.
girl, and you don't really." And it's like, no, there's a monster in my. And it always bothers me when the parents are like so like dismissive, like,
Yeah.
and I get that the children have like this imagination and it's hard easy to dismiss, but at the same time, it's a real to them, but also to your point, it's like the odds are much higher that they're experiencing is real, and it
Yeah.
really really bothers me when in a movie or something a kid goes, so a man climbed through my window and stood at the foot of my bed and stared at me while I slept, and the parents are like, oh, you're crazy,
Yeah.
you're
That
having a
didn't
nightmare. If
happen.
that happened in real life, and if your kid said a man climbed through my window, you'd be like, what? Like
Yeah.
sprinting in there,
Well,
like
you would
anyway.
hope. You would hope a good parent would.
I would, yeah, or even, yeah, or a bad parent may be worried about their nest egg that's hiding under the couch or something.
Yeah.
But yes, but yeah, but it's all this is it's a random pet peeve of mine. I think like when screenwriters, when the kid says something as bad is happening, have one person believe them. It's so
Yeah.
frustrating when no one
Because
believes them.
even if the child is imagining it, the whole point is the child believes there is a man at the foot of the bed. And I don't know if this is leftover anxiety disorder from when we were little and we watched Sesame Street and nobody believed Big Bird about Snuffleupagus. Do you
Yeah,
remember that? Like,
no,
oh, I think you're
but I
younger than
but
me.
I get it. I get it, and I
Yeah,
did
because
watch Sesame Street.
yeah, way back before everybody could see Snuffleupagus, only Big Bird could. And Big Bird
Oh, I
would
didn't know that.
always say, oh, my friend was just here. And people are like, oh, Big Bird, you're so crazy. And even as a
Yeah,
child, I would be anxious because it taught me,
yeah,
what if grown-ups don't believe me if I
yeah.
see a skeleton in the closet? Or
Yeah, and it's like, or like real world things like, and it's the same thing. It's the same trope happens with like, I hate to say it, but it's true, and it's a horrible trope. It happens with like women, right? In their to like in movies, like to their husband. Like there was just a movie that came out. I have no idea what it was called, but I saw a trailer for it, and it was about this. They moved to a new house, and the woman was like, "There's something really wrong here. Like I'm seeing things are coming out of the walls, or there's like a demon in the room or whatever. And he's like, honey, you're so
Honey,
stupid.
it must
You're
just be
so dumb.
your PMS, you
Yeah,
silly daffy lady.
let's get you on some medication right away because you're obviously hallucinating. I hate that trope. That whole
Yeah.
trope needs to go out the window. It's so disturbing on so many levels.
Yes. And
I
I'm
hate
somebody
it.
who actually
I hate
used
it.
that trope in a book that I
Yeah.
wrote. And I was like, why am I doing this? It was historical fiction. So I'm
It's
like,
yeah.
and and everybody who read the book, they were just like, I hate that husband so much.
Yeah.
Like,
And it's so satisfying when someone doesn't do it. Like, it's so satisfying when you see a movie where someone's like, I think I saw like a ghost in the attic. And I love it when like the other character's like, really? We
let's
should go
go
check
find
that
out.
out. That sounds really awful. And I totally 100% believe you. And let's go. And like, it's such a like wonderful, warm feeling as a viewer where you're
Yeah.
like, thank you. See,
Well,
it's
and
like not every time. It doesn't have to be like, oh, you need to be on medication.
yeah. And I think that's the good thing about having kids in your books because kids will always say, all right, let's go check it out.
Well, kids always believe kids,
Yeah.
right? And that's like the old, that is the fun part of it. And there's a story I wrote called Commodore where these kids all go to a junkyard to look for a haunted car, this like mythical haunted car that is rusting in the junkyard. And um and it's great because the kids are all like, yeah, we're all going to go do this. We are all totally on board. And that's one of the fun things about, yeah, kids is they're like, someone says, hey, you want to go look for a haunted car? And there's like, yeah, absolutely. I want to do
Yeah.
that. That sounds
I mean, I would
like a
do that
super good
now.
idea. Right. Yeah. So I don't like it when they're like, oh, I don't believe you when you're stupid. Anyway, pet peeve.
Pet peeve. This interview theme is Philip's pet peeves with
And
Jennifer and
don't get
Philip
me
Fracassi.
started on slow drivers because I will go on for hours.
What about if people don't use their blinker?
If you're in the fast lane, you got to move it, man.
This is such an LA thing you're doing.
I know, I know. When you're the 405 going to the 101, you can't get in the left lane. You got to be to the right. Everyone knows that. Sorry.
Oh my gosh. And I live in the middle of nowhere, so the traffic that we get out here is when there's a bear in the middle of the road.
Yeah, I long for that kind of traffic in my future. I want to live somewhere where it's not like, oh my God, there's, a naked man running across the freeway and I have to swerve, but there's so many cars that I can't move and everyone's going 120 miles an hour. I'd much rather just be like, oh, look at that.
Oh,
There's
a moose.
a tree fell in our 2-lane country road.
I feel like where you live in LA and where I live in the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire both lend themselves, though, very well to horror scenarios.
Yeah, you get that. That's another trope, right? That like driving on the on the country road in the middle of the
Yeah.
night with a wall of dark trees on either
Yeah.
side, and uh-oh, flat tire. I hope
Oh,
somebody comes along, and then somebody does come along, and you're like, oh
oh
no.
no. This is definitely somebody who probably makes suits out of people's skin.
Yeah, yeah, it's a skin
Yeah.
suitor.
It's a
That's what we
skin
call them.
suitor for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I know. I think one time I was interviewing your good friend, fellow horror author Josh Mallerman, and we talked about that. How when you're driving down like a long road at night and you see that far off farmhouse in the distance, how like immediately you just think nothing good happens there.
Nothing
Like
good has ever happened
another
on this
good has
stretch
there.
of road.
No, no. You never just look at it and go, that's a beautiful farmhouse. Like
Let's
maybe
pull
during the day
over.
you would. Let's pull
Let's pull
over
over and just have a moment here and look at
and
that
just look at it
distant,
and distant.
shadowy, dark
Yeah.
farmhouse. And
And just think about the lovely lives the people that live there have. No, you
yeah,
think those poor people in that weird house.
yeah. And what's in these woods? I don't know.
And what's in these woods? Why
Nothing
would you build
good.
it? Nothing good. It's murder
Nothing good.
country.
Yeah, it's murder. It's nothing in there but ravenous beasts and most likely
And
a tribe of serial killers. Most likely.
yeah. Yeah, who
Or
live in like a
witches, I guess. Witches.
witches in New England.
Yeah.
Yes, they're all witches.
Yeah.
And the tribe of serial killers, they would live in like a basement bunker. that you don't
Yeah.
even really know it's there until like you're just walking for some reason in the woods and you're like, oh, it sounds kind of hollow underneath where I'm
Well, then you fall
standing.
through or you
And you
fall
fall
through the
through.
leaf trap because they
Oh,
probably set some sort of
yeah.
leaf trap that you fall into, and it's got the spikes or whatever. I mean, that's what happens to me. I don't know.
Yeah. This is why
I can only
you
talk. I can only talk about my personal experience.
yeah. This is why you live in Los Angeles, because you're just like, if I fall through one more leaf trap
Yeah,
in the
there's no
woods,
leaves. There are no
there
leaves.
are no
There are no
trees.
leaves in Los Angeles. No, there is nothing green here. It's pretty much just
There's the
houses.
money.
Yeah, there's just houses and freeways. That's kind of all it is.
Sounds
Very concrete.
beautiful.
Yeah, no shade.
So, so you, okay, screenwriter, short story writer, novelist. Is there a favorite thing that you write or an let's start actually, yeah, is there a favorite thing that you write?
It's interesting because I do a podcast called The Dark Word where I have writers come on and we talk about writing. And yesterday I had a conversation with Brian Keene,
Love
and
him.
yeah, he's super great. It was a wonderful chat, and when we talked a little bit about how he loves the novella format, and I know a lot of writers like the novella format, um, and I used to, and so I've kind of changed. So early on, I was like all about writing short stories, and that was because I hadn't published anything, and it's obviously easier in many ways to publish a short story than it is a novel. And then as I started publishing short stories, I find that a few of my short stories went a little long, and I had a little bit of like a you know resume, I guess you'd call it. And so I would go to publishers about, hey, who publish novellas, and say I have this novella, and I ended up publishing a couple novellas, and then I got an opportunity. Then I kind of was like, well, I'm going to try and write a novel because now I've gotten to this point, where so I wrote a novel, and then I got an agent, and now it's all about like the novel. So it's been something that's changed as my career has changed. Now it's really all about writing novels and taking time out to write the occasional short story and the very occasional novella. Um, and then, but early on it was all, but it kind of changed as I went. So it's an interesting way of doing things. And basically, what it comes down to is, if I want to make this my job, right? If I want to have it as my career,
One
then
that makes
novels,
money.
yeah. If you want to make money, novels are really the only way you can actually make real,
Yeah.
money, legit money. And even then it's, tough sledding. So, so that's kind of why, I guess I got to a point where I was like, oh, wait a second, I think I can actually do this full time and make it my job. Novels became really the focus, but I also really enjoy writing novels. I mean, I have the screenplay history, and screenplays. The process of writing a screenplay lends itself very well to the process of writing a full novel because
Yeah.
you're creating a novel's worth of story when you write a screenplay, and if not more, then and so it's very easy to kind of take those story beats and put them into a novel form and reshape it to some degree as needed. So I enjoy writing novels. I enjoy outlining them. I enjoy coming up with a
You
bigger
enjoy
world.
outlining?
I'm a huge outliner.
Oh, Philip,
Yeah,
can you teach
huge.
me this skill?
Huge. I use Scrivener for my outlining. So, but yeah, so it's all based on story structure that I learned in, Robert McKee books or or Blake Snyder books or whatever. And I kind of apply it to novels. I do that. I do apply those same story building, structure techniques, I would say, I guess is the word, for short stories and even novellas, but less so. Whereas a novel, it's really like, okay, this is going to be, uh, you know, 400 pages. It's got to have a structure to it. And
Yeah.
also, I like outlining because I don't like I don't like thinking about where the story is going to go. When I'm actually writing the book, when I'm writing, I just want to write. I don't want to
Hmm.
think about, okay, now what's going to happen to this character? How do I get them out
Yeah.
of this situation? I just want to write. I just want to go. So I really like to have everything really fleshed out before I actually start writing, so that I don't have to think about it. I can just enjoy the writing process, focus on the prose. And then, and you and I talked about this recently, and then if like a surprise situation
Yeah.
occurs, or if a character does something that I didn't expect them to, and I have to kind of pivot, then that's fine. But at least I know where I'm going. And also when you're writing like mysteries or thrillers or whatever, you want to be able to seed stuff that's going to come later.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to like drop hints, or or I want to misdirect the reader, in here, so that they don't know exactly what's going to happen. So things like that, but you have to know where you're going so you can do that stuff properly. And I'm not a big believer in going back and doing it, because I think it comes off as clunky. I've read books where I feel like they've done that, and I kind of like get the feeling like, I feel like this writer just kind of went back and like inserted this
I
to
know,
make
like,
this
oh,
work.
quick, I have to insert a hint because my
Yeah.
twist is gonna be too
Oh,
out of left field. It's gonna make no
yeah. Oh,
sense.
by the way, I forgot to mention, they have a crowbar that they keep in their under their bed, but
Yeah.
not. Yeah, now let's continue with. So,
Yeah. Like,
yeah,
this is Chekhov's gun. Hello.
right. So I like outlining. I don't outline stories, um, and I don't really outline novellas. I do, but I do outline my novels.
See, I always think I've been a solid pantser, for a few books now, and every book I'm just like, this would be so much easier if I knew what I was doing before I just jumped in. So I will say, I started an outline yesterday,
Oh, good for you.
and I was able to very quickly outline the first like 9 chapters of a new project, and I was like, this is easier. Uh,
Yeah,
it is great. And I just feel like I immediately texted my agent, and she was just like, I told you it would be easier. Like, just very
yeah,
proud of me. I
yeah.
was
And it's
like,
a lot
I
of
took
work.
notes.
It's a lot of work. You don't think about it as being a lot of work, but it is. That's kind of, for me, the heavy lifting is really the outlining process. The writing part for me is just fun. It's a
Yeah.
blast. But because you're doing all the heavy thinking. Well, what's going to happen? What happens now? What happens now? And so I like to, yeah, like I said, I just don't. I kind of like to separate the two things. I like to have it all thought out, and then I like to write. And when I'm writing, I'm very much about the writing, meaning I'm very much about the prose and the best way to say something, or the best way to, describe something. I just don't want to think about. I don't want to overthink about like what happens next, because that
Yeah.
you worry about it, and then when you're worrying about it, you're not really focusing on what you're writing. So at least for me. So yeah,
No,
that's
I
what I do.
agree with you completely. Um,
And
as somebody,
occasionally, a publisher will want to see an outline before
yes.
the novel, as we've
Yeah.
discussed.
And that is panic inducing sometimes.
Yeah, it's
You're
terrifying.
like, oh no, I have to know what the end is, which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
usually, I know the beginning, the middle, and I try to know the end before I dive into a project. Um, but the last book I wrote, I did not know the end. And I'm
yeah.
telling you,
I
it was a struggle. And when I finally realized what the end was, I was like, how did I not know this? Like, how did I?
yeah,
It was seemed the perfect ending.
yeah. I personally, I can't start a project unless I know how it's going to end. Even short stories, I have to know in my head beginning, middle, and an end. I don't have to outline it, but I have to know what's going to
Yeah.
happen. I don't just like. I'm not that guy. I don't just like write and just like, oh, let's see what happens. I'd love to be surprised by my imagination. I'm not that
Yeah.
guy. I want to know. I want to know where I'm going, because it's so much more comfortable for me that way than the other way. So, but
So
that's
how
perfect.
long
I mean,
does
Stephen Graham Jones. Those guys. There are a lot of people who they just
that just
go.
go for it?
Yeah.
So how long does your outlining process last? Like, how long does a project live in your head before fingers to keyboard happen?
It kind of depends on how much time I can commit to that project. What I mean by that is like, so right now I have like 3 big projects on my plate, and so I kind of shift from one to the other, and they're all sort of in that like in imagination process. Um, but they're all also on deadline. So it's like one's a video game thing, one's a screenplay thing, and then one's this novel I have to write. So, but
I love that you
typically
said
speak,
this novel I have to write. Like,
yeah,
oh
well, I've already
goodness.
sold it, right? So
Yeah.
I have to write it. The yeah, which is also an anxiety inducing. But the typically I spend about, um, I would say, 3 to 4 weeks outlining and and then really thinking about it. Because once I once I'm like, okay, this is what I'm doing, and I begin the outline process, and I start sort of framing it out, then all I'm thinking about the whole rest of the day in, is that story. And like, well, what if I did this, or what if I? It's always in my head. I'm always tinkering with it, and then next time I sit down, I'm like, oh, okay, let's do this or let's do this. So I kind of let it come somewhat organically. I can't just sit down and be like, okay, I'm going to write the outline today. And then once I kind of feel really good about, okay, now I've kind of given it a lot of thought. I kind of have come up with some cool little twists or tweaks or interesting bits. And I feel really good about the framework of the story. Then I can be like, okay, and I'm ready to start writing. Um, so that's usually about I would say 3 to 4 weeks. And then it takes me about another 4 to 6 weeks to write the draft. And then
Wow.
edits, forget about it. You're talking months of
Yeah.
edits. But I'm usually, when I'm editing a novel, um, I usually I do one pass, what I call on the screen, where I just read through the whole thing and I kind of rewrite stuff and da da da, make sure. I do a pass where I print the whole thing out, on computer paper and red pen everything, and then usually I bind it. So I'll go to like Amazon KDP and I'll do like an arc of this
Yeah.
book, and for like $5, um, Amazon will create like a bound book, and I read it that way, and I find a million things that I never would have found the other
Yeah.
ways when I'm reading it in book form. So that's kind of what and then once all that's done, it's ready to go to my agent or to the publisher or whatever, and then they have all their
Yeah. And then
edits
it
and
comes back with
proofreading.
somehow still like, oh gosh, how did I miss these mistakes?
It's a you could I can't it's always impressive to me when I read a book with no mistakes, because I can't even fathom it, because I've gone, so Boys in the Valley is an example where like I did all those passes I just talked to you about, and then Earthling published it as a limited edition, and they had their proofreader read it, and the publisher read it, and they had a whole thing of fixes, and then they sent me a bound arc, which I read again, and I found an absolute avalanche of fixes, and then we sent it to Nightfire, who's publishing it in July, and I guarantee you they're going to come back with at least another slew of fixes. So it's insane how much there is
Yeah,
that needs to be corrected, and it's just it's somewhat panic inducing, because you're
it
never going to
is.
catch everything, but
Yeah. And then
you
those
hope to catch
Amazon
most
and
of it.
Goodreads
Oh,
reviews that
one
like
star, baby.
the 1 star, it's had typos, and it's like,
Yeah,
oh, then you're
one
just
star. What's up?
defeated.
Page 146. What's up with the it's having uh,
It's, why is there
the
an
conjugate?
apostrophe?
Yeah, why is there an apostrophe for it? It's not possessive,
Yeah.
idiot.
I know. Failure. Oh, okay. And I think we talked about this before is like, nobody's strong enough to go to Goodreads and start reading their reviews. It's just
So
you
what I
need
do is,
you need
no,
some
it's the worst.
scotch.
It is the worst thing you can do
Yeah.
as a writer, is to read reviews. It's that, because I'll tell you, when we talked about this, because if it's a 5 star review, you're like, yeah, okay, and then next 5 star, okay, 4 star, okay, next, okay, what's this 2 star thing? Oh my god! And then
Mhm.
you're like thinking about it, and you're angry, and you're like can't sleep that night, and
Yeah.
all the other reviews are completely
Yeah, and
disregarded. It's
nothing
all about
matters. Nothing
no,
matters except for the one person who said, I hated all the characters.
yeah,
I don't know why I bothered to finish this book. It was just sad people doing sad things. And you're like,
yeah.
what? I'm
Or they
crushed.
call you names or whatever, and
Yeah.
um, yeah, so what I do is I just go, because I do go to Goodreads and I look on Amazon, but I don't read the reviews. I just go and see
The number.
I look at the ratings or whatever, and I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, that's everything's looking pretty good. I haven't been hit too hard here. This looks, because I want to kind of know how a book is being accepted.
Yeah.
But I try not to actually read the reviews themselves. Terrible idea.
Yeah. So every author watching this, just stay away from Goodreads. You will never be emotionally strong enough.
No,
You might think you are, but
you're not.
you're
No.
not. You're not. We're neurotic creatures, writers are. So you'll
Yeah, and it
never get
doesn't really
over it.
matter because the reality is it's all so subjective.
It's so subjective. And I
And
think
like,
especially with horror, because you get people who right away, I don't know why they bought the book, but they'll start a review with like, well, I don't like horror, or
oh my God, don't get
this
me started
isn't
on that.
horror. And I'm like, you
Yeah,
can't, the this isn't horror people is just so strange to me because,
yeah,
and especially, so you're a writer who crosses a lot of genres, especially your upcoming book, A Child Alone with Strangers. That is a horror novel. It's also a crime novel. It is also literary fiction. It's also, a monster novel. But I could see somebody reading it, especially at the beginning, and saying, oh, this isn't a horror novel.
right.
Skipping over the fact that, as we talked about before, there is a monster on page one.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, don't get me started. Yeah, people don't like some people don't like prologues, and, and that book is a prologue, so that gets people upset. But yeah. So I get that a lot. I get that with my short fiction. I get the hell like I don't think this is horror, and it's like it doesn't matter. Like why does that matter? Like can't you just enjoy reading whatever it
Yeah.
is? But yeah, Child Among Strangers is definitely a hybrid novel. It's crime and horror for sure throughout, but then the second half is really when the horror is
Yes.
guns blazing, and the first half is a little more, I think, probably procedural crime. So, but yeah, there are monsters throughout, human and otherwise. So,
Human and
yeah, so I don't get, I just wrote an article about this for Becky Spratford for her library ALA blog that she's doing in October. But yeah, I don't get a lot of people complaining about multiple genres. I think I personally really like multiple genres. I love one of my favorite things is when you start a movie or whatever and you think it's going to be this kind of movie and you're kind of like okay and then this is going to happen and then like halfway through the movie they're like no wait it's actually like a time
yeah.
travel thing or it's a horror thing or whatever and I love those kind of movies and I love those kind of stories and I like writing those kind of stories where it's like you think it's one thing and then it kind of surprises you and becomes something different. I do that a lot with I would say I do that a lot more with my short fiction than novels, but it is important to me um, to not be too obvious in what's coming, to not be too transparent into what to kind of defy expectations, And I think I do that for two reasons. One, I do it for myself as a writer because I want to be entertained and excited about what I'm writing, and also for the reader, I want them to feel like, oh, this is really fresh and different, and I wasn't expecting this, and it's always fun to be surprised um, in those situations. So I do tend to try and turn things on their head if I can, or at least not go to where people expect me to go, or where I would expect me to go. Yeah, I had to mute myself to cough too.
I know. I'm like, oh no, my voice is getting all scratchy. Um, so you said at the beginning of our interview that you have always been writing, even though, professionally just since 2015. What was like the first thing you remember writing when you were a kid? Bad poetry?
No, I remember writing. I vividly remember when I started writing. I started writing when I was in third grade, and it was one of those things where it was the first time I was introduced to creative writing, where as a school function where the teacher was like, okay, we're all going to make up a story. And I was like, what? Like my mind was sort of blown. And I wrote this sort of like fan fiction, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fan fiction. Um, but it was like, sort of like horror and like like the turtles, the bad things happened to the turtle. I think two of them died. And it was like this mystery thriller horror thing. And, um, and it was a blast and I loved it. And I'll never forget standing in front of my class and reading the story and hearing all those kids laugh and clap at the end and like gasp or like and I'll never forget that moment. And that was the first time I wrote something and shared it with somebody. And I remember that response being so strong. And at the time that I was like, this is amazing. This is awesome. This is what I want to, I want to do this my whole life. And and from then on, I just never stopped. And I think I tried to write a novel in the sixth grade, and that did not work out. It was a science fiction novel, and I started writing it. And I remember very vividly, I was like, I'm going to write a novel. I think I got like 50 pages into it, and I was so frustrated because I wasn't smart enough or knowledgeable enough, we'll say, I didn't know any of the technology, and I was like, I didn't know how to like realistically depict all these things that I had in my imagination. And so I stopped doing it. And then I wrote like a novella in seventh grade called The
I love it.
Forest. Yeah, which was, I still have it somewhere, which is about, oddly, about a there's about these kids who live in this neighborhood, and in the middle of the neighborhood it's sort of like a circular neighborhood, and in the middle of the neighborhood is like this park, but it's like a forest, kind of parky forest thing. And um and the kids would all play in the parky forest thing. And there was like this monster dog that lived in the monster forest thing for some reason, and he started knocking off the kids and was like killing the kids one by one, and was like,
And you wrote this in seventh grade.
yeah, and like tracking them to their house, the scent, using his scent to like track them to their homes, and breaking into their living rooms and eating them and stuff. And it's called The Forest. And so yeah, and yeah, so I kind of ever since then, and then I kind of started writing a lot of more when I got a little older. I was like, oh, I should really, literature is important and fiction is important. I should really write about like important things, and it shouldn't be genre stuff. It should be like about people and relationships. And I was reading probably too much Debut at the time. I don't know, but I was like, that was kind of what I was really kind of got into, and went nowhere with it other than honing my craft, I guess.
Yeah,
And then yeah, and then it wasn't really until 2015 when I was like, I'm gonna take a crack at writing horror fiction,
I love it.
for realsy.
For
And
reals, yo. Yeah,
yeah, and then it's
it's
kind of ever since then it's been just
I love
took off.
that. I feel like, as genre writers, we get this kind of thing in our head where we don't take ourselves as seriously as, the real writers. Like, I
Right.
just, I think about my books, and I know we joked before, I'm like, I write literary horror. I mean, it's still horror, or it's like, oh, I
Yeah.
write literary crime.
Right.
We should be proud to be like, I'm a horror writer, I'm a crime writer, instead of,
Yeah.
um, thinking that we're less just because, and I don't, I can blame college for that, or, like something
Yeah.
where, because you always
The
have
only
these
thing,
authors that are elevated because they're literary authors.
yeah, it's tricky because for one thing, there's two reasons that I sometimes delve into subgenre type descriptions of what I do. One is because horror is such a wide range, of content, and I try and give readers expectations. Um, so I kind of say like, well, I'm sort of like, I compare myself to other authors only in the sense of like, this is the kind of stuff I write. It's not like splatterpunk. It's not really body horror. It's not serial killers. It's kind of like, so I always kind of say it's sort of like supernatural thrillers, um,
Hmm.
just to give people a sense of it. And the other thing that sucks is that if you tell people who aren't, um, who haven't read a lot of horror, that you write horror, they immediately get this preconceived notion in their head of what kind of,
Yeah.
you're writing about zombies or vampires
Yeah.
or serial killers. It's always a little disappointing because there's so much, more to the horror genre and field, in a sense of range. I love those things, they're great. Not
Yeah.
Don't tweet at
Yeah.
me. I'm
We
just
are not saying that werewolves, vampires, and zombies are bad.
I
We love
I
them.
just I just wrote a vampire story. So,
I
but
just
I
wrote
but
a
it
werewolf story.
okay, see everybody, relax. I think that you want people to try. I think you want to be able to give a reader a sense of what kind of stories you write, so that they can be like, oh, I like that kind of story. I don't like. So but it's too bad though. I wrote a little essay about this too recently, where it was like, I wish there wasn't that preconceived notion. I think we as horror writers, we owe a lot to film, and also film has sort of pigeonholed us a little bit because horror fit as film is, I think, a little more narrow than horror as fiction is.
Yeah.
And so I think people think about horror film and horror fiction as being like they're both the same kind of stuff. And I think horror fiction has a much broader range than horror film does. And then caveat, caveat, caveat. There's always exceptions, but yeah, there's always like for every killing of a sacred deer, there's Friday the 13th, part 12.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Exactly, exactly. I know. And I know I get a lot of when people say like, "Oh, you don't seem like a horror writer." I'm like, "What does that
I've had
even mean?"
I've had
Like,
that.
yeah,
I
you
had
seem
one guy
so
go.
normal and nice.
I had this comment once on I think it was on Goodreads. I can't remember. And I at that time I had like this author photo, and the other photo was like me, and I was like in like a denim shirt, and I was like at a convention, and I was like smiling, and I was just like, "Hey, what's up?" kind of photo. And the guy was like, "I just read Alter, and I came to this site, and I just saw the author's photo, and I am blown away because he seems like a totally normal, happy person." And I'm like, I am a normal
A normal,
woman.
happy person. Yeah.
Maybe I'm not super normal, but I am like you can be a normal, happy person and still write horror. But yeah, there's that also like we're all like have
Like
the
gothed
devil tat,
out.
the
Yeah.
devil shirts and the horns that we wear around our house and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Just like wandering around like and we're angry and creepy and
Right. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I've
Yeah.
done
I mean,
interviews and
I do actually eat children,
you
but
eat
that's not
children. Yeah.
related to
That is
my
just a
fiction.
dietary thing.
Exactly. It's
That
exactly.
is
Exactly
yeah,
right.
has nothing to do with the kind of writer you are.
Yeah.
So, I know you're busy. Got a lot of stuff coming out. So we've got to
Yeah.
make sure everybody who is watching this knows that your next book, A Child Alone with Strangers, releases at the end of October. I believe it's
Oc-
October 25th.
October 25th. Yes. A 600-page old school crime horror hybrid.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty entertaining. I think it's kind of a fun ride.
I
Um,
read it and I will agree.
oh, thank you.
It does feel like an old school, and I mean this in the best way. It feels like, a cross between, like a Stephen King kind of vibe to it because, it's a thick book. Like it's a commitment. So
Yeah, it's a big book.
bravo. Bravo. And you have Gothic coming out in February, correct?
Right. And this is right. This is the cover for Gothic, which is coming
Love
out in February from Cemetery Dance. And Boys in the Valley comes out July 11th, I think. From it's coming out from Tor Nightfire here in the United States, and it's coming out from Orbit in the UK and UK Commonwealth countries like Australia and what have you. So yeah, and hopefully we'll get it translated into some. I think right now it's currently being translated into Spanish and Czech,
Oh,
but
I
hopefully we'll get
already can't
more.
wait for the Czech cover.
I know,
I'm
I know.
just I always
That
love
cover that
seeing
has been
foreign
great.
editions of books and as somebody who just loves the Czech Republic now I'm like, "Oh, I want to
Yeah,
see
and
that."
yeah, the international editions that I've had the pleasure of, having published, they're always such a unique, fresh take on the U.S. covers, and yeah, and I'm hoping that the new Boys in the Valley cover, not the Earthling cover that's already out. I'm hoping that
That's
will,
awesome.
yeah, that's the Earthling cover. I'm hoping that it should be revealed, I think, in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So
I'm really excited
that's what I've been
to
told. Yeah.
see that cover. I know I mentioned it one time when we talked before. The cover for the Earthling edition, this very scary building looks just like my house.
I know.
So
I've seen that on Facebook. You posted
yeah,
pictures.
so I'm just
Such a
like,
cool house. Yeah.
oh, when I got this book, I'm
It's
like,
not your
oh,
house, by the way. It's
I
not.
know. I was just like,
Just
that
so
is
you know.
unsettling
I
to
hope it's
me.
not your house. That would be really
Yeah, it's
bad.
not. It would be bad for me.
No, it's a remote orphanage in Pennsylvania, and So, but yeah, Boys in the Valley, for those who may not be familiar with it, is or haven't heard about it, is yeah. So it's about these orphans who live in this remote orphanage in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, turn of the century, that's like 1905, I think, and an evil permeates the orphanage, and it sort of drives some of the boys to do very bad things.
which is fantastic. Um, yeah, loved it. Stayed up way too late when I was reading it. Um, Legitimately scared me. And as a horror writer and an avid horror reader, it gets harder to scare me every year. And so, thank you. You gave me nightmares
Excellent,
in the
excellent.
best possible way.
I love hearing that. Yeah, thank you.
Philip, you have been, as usual, amazing to talk to. Please make sure you tell everybody where to find you on the internet, your web address.
Yes. So the best place to find me is at my home. You can come here any. No, I'm just kidding.
You know,
The best place to find me is pfracassi.com. Uh, and I'm also on Facebook. You can search Philip Fracassi and you'll find me there. You can also find me on Twitter at Philip Fracassi. I'm on Instagram, P Fracassi. And I'm not on TikTok, so don't look for me there. And yeah, and those are all the best places to find me. And then you can always contact me via my website or via Twitter or Facebook. I messages are usually open. So
awesome, Philip. And if anybody's interested in me, I am Jennifer Ann Gordon. My website is jenniferanngordon.com. All of the links to my social media are on there. I have a very cute dog, so you might want to check out my Instagram because he's adorable. Um, but yeah, thank you again, Philip. And thank you
yeah,
all to her watching. Thank you to BookFest for this incredible opportunity.
thank you so much.
Bye.